Officer, and I thank the Minister for advance sight of her statement and for agreeing to our request to give it. However, I am really disappointed in where we are and what it says today. I introduced my bill in 2022 because I believed and still do that disabled children and young people need extra support at transition to give them a fighting chance in their future. My bill was rejected and this government promised to introduce a national transitions to adulthood strategy. The Minister said at the time, and I quote, that the government are not resting on our laurels, that the strategy is now delayed, a year since my bill was rejected, and indeed 8 years since the government promised a strategy in their 2016 manifesto, makes it hard to see how the commitment isn't resting on their laurels. And to use engagement with a group of people who are consistently engaged and have been telling the government about this issue as a reason for that is really, really unfortunate. 2,202 young disabled people finished school in 2023. They could have had support had the government published the promised strategy. The fact that this government are delaying this strategy again is a betrayal, and they need to answer to the thousands of disabled children who've missed out. Because what's the point in a government if it takes them more than 8 years to commit to something they say they'll do in a manifesto? So,
questions at the end of her statement, and so there should be no interventions or interruptions, and I call on Minister Natalie Dawn-Innes. Up to 10 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and thank you for the opportunity to make this statement today. I'd also like to extend my thanks to members across the Chamber for raising the important topic of transitions to adulthood for young disabled people. It remains clear to me that there is cross-party consensus that we should and we will do everything we can to improve the experience of transitions to adulthood for young disabled people. And I'm heartened that so many members in this chamber share the government's ambition of improving their experiences and outcomes during this important period of their lives. I know from our work to develop the National Transitions to Adulthood strategy and from the evidence that the Education, Children and Young People Committee heard on Ms Duncan Glancy's bill that there are excellent examples of local authorities, education, health and social care services and more working to improve the experiences of disabled children and young people transitioning to adulthood across Scotland. Just earlier today, I had the pleasure of meeting some of the young people and families who benefit from NHS Lothian and Spina Bifida Hydrocephalus Scotland's transition clinic, which the Scottish Government has helped to support. I heard firsthand about the positive impact of multi-agency collaboration and cooperation, which places young people and their families at the very heart of that transitions process. Improving transitions for young disabled people remains of critical importance to the Scottish Government, and the Minister for Equalities and I continue to work across Government to ensure continued focus and urgency around this agenda. Today provides an opportunity to update Parliament on our continued efforts to improve young disabled people's experiences of transitions, and I'll also provide further details regarding our commitment to introducing Scotland's first National Transitions to Adulthood strategy. And I give Parliament a commitment to engage constructively with the opposition on these matters and confirm that the Government remains open to strengthening the framework required to improve the experiences of young disabled people at points of transition. That is the goal that we are all seeking to achieve. I firstly want to be clear that this Government is taking action now to improve young disabled people's experiences of transitions. We're not waiting until we publish the strategy. I know that members across the Chamber want to make sure that we are driving urgent action, given what was said during the Stage 1 debate on the Disabled Children and Young People Transition to Adulthood Scotland Bill. I want to reassure them, disabled children and young people and those who support them, that we are. As Parliament will remember, there was agreement across parties that whilst the ambitions of Ms Duncan Glancy's bill to improve the experiences and outcomes for young disabled people were wholly welcome, it remained unclear how the bill would work in practice to resolve the issues being experienced. As we heard in this chamber last year, the Education, Children and Young People Committee was thorough in its evidence gathering and discussions with stakeholders, including with young disabled people and organisations such as the Association for Real Change, and many stakeholders also expressed doubt that the bill could deliver on its laudable aim of resolving the issues that are experienced by young disabled people as they transition to young adult life. However, I am also fully aware that those stakeholders rightly expect the Scottish Government to uphold the commitment it has made to support young disabled people. So too do they expect all of us in this chamber to look beyond party politics and to focus on the people at the heart of this, who have asked us to work together with them to get this right. Today I'll set out some of the actions the Scottish Government is already taking and our next steps as we prepare the strategy. Like NHS Lothian and Spina Bifida Hydrocephalus Scotland's work, there are other examples of excellent practice across Scotland. For example, the work of ARC Scotland. Between 2020 to 23, the Scottish Government funded ARC's principles into practice trials in 10 local authority areas to improve the lived experiences of young people who need additional support to make the transition to young adult life. Building on the success of these trials, we are continuing to provide grant funding to ARC Scotland through the Children, Young People, Families and Adult Learning Third Sector Fund. This funding will enable ARC to continue to run the Scottish Transitions Forum and to support the wider implementation of principles into practice and Compass across Scotland. Since opening at the end of 2017, we've also invested over £20 million in the Independent Living Fund Scotland's Transition Fund to support young disabled people to make a smoother transition from childhood into adulthood by promoting independence, community participation, social inclusion and confidence. In 24-25, we've continued to provide funding to support Enable Scotland's Stepping Up Transitions programme, which connects young disabled people to fair work, education and productive activities designed to support a successful transition into adult life and work. We're also ensuring that all young people in Scotland, including young disabled people, have access to quality careers advice through the National Careers Service led by Skills Development Scotland. Developing the Young Workforce School coordinators also continue to link young people with employers. We've recently incorporated the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child into domestic law, ensuring we're a country that respects, protects and fulfils the rights of all children, including disabled children. As part of our work to implement the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child Act, the Scottish Government has funded NHS Education for Scotland to support health boards and the Improvement Service in implementing a children's human rights approach in their practice. We're also supporting other public bodies such as the Independent Living Fund and others who have a role in supporting young people transition to adult life and ensuring they take a children's human rights approach. Our work with NES includes supporting health boards to consider children's rights during transitions to adulthood. In 2023, we published the Getting It Right for Every Child Child's Plan Practice Statement. And this includes new guidance for transitions and makes clear that particular consideration should be given to disabled children and young people. And the guidance complements the existing suite of GovFEC policy and practice guidance that we published in September 2022. Building on GovFEC best practice, the Scottish Government is also co-designing Getting It Right for everyone, including with place-based pathfinders in areas such as Fife, North Lanarkshire and Aberdeen City, who are considering young people transitioning from children's services to adult services. We're currently developing the GovFEC Team Around the Person toolkit and testing it with pathfinders and partners. And this toolkit will help to support positive, early conversations around transitions for young people with a focus on early planning, accessible information and the coordination of professionals around the person. This toolkit is due to be published soon. Presiding Officer, these are just some of the examples of the actions being taken forward across the Scottish Government to improve young disabled people's experiences of transitions to adulthood. However, despite these fantastic efforts, I understand that experiences differ and some young disabled people are not getting the support that they need at the right time. And I'm clear that all of those with responsibility for transitions must do more to improve the experiences of disabled children and young people, and that doing nothing is not an option. And that's why, in addition to the range of work I've already set out and more, the Scottish Government remains committed to introducing the National Transitions to Adulthood strategy. This will help to ensure that there is a joined-up approach so that all young disabled people in Scotland can experience a supported and positive transition to young adult life. Presiding Officer, I'd like to take the opportunity before Parliament today to state that the Scottish Government's recent decision to extend the planned timeline for publishing the strategy is not one which has been taken lightly. It is one, however, which was considered necessary in order to give the fullest consideration to the extensive and invaluable contributions made by stakeholders who attended our recent engagement sessions between May and August 24. This revision was also necessary to make sure that appropriate actions and priorities are considered and discussed across government, and we are working on that now. There must also be sufficient time to ensure that the strategy can be published alongside a range of accessible formats in order that it meets the needs of those that it aims to support. This decision to extend the timeline was made in collaboration with the External Strategic Working Group, which was set up to support the development of the strategy and which includes key stakeholder representatives of young disabled people, their parent carers, disabled people's organisations and others who support them. To conclude, Presiding Officer, I hope that members across the Chamber are reassured that the Scottish Government continues to take urgent action and maintains focus on work which supports improved experiences of transitions to adulthood for young disabled people in Scotland. This Government remains committed to delivering progress towards this goal, and we will continue to work collaboratively with young disabled people and their families, with those providing the high-quality support and planned transitions we know every young disabled person should have, and with colleagues across this chamber to ensure that all young disabled people making the transition to adulthood in Scotland are empowered to achieve their full potential. I want to take this opportunity to again extend an invitation to all parties here in this chamber to work with us to ensure that we get this right. As a Parliament, we owe it to the young people of Scotland to put aside those political differences and work together to deliver a strategy which supports young disabled people as they navigate one of the most important periods of their life. I was clear to Ms Duncan Glancy during the considerations of her bill that I would be willing to work closely on the transition strategy going forward, and my position is the same today. I would urge any member who has feedback on the development of the draft strategy to get in touch with me so that we can ensure this is delivered as soon as possible. We all have a duty to work together to get this right. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Minister. The Minister will now take questions on the issues raised in her statement. I intend to allow around 20 minutes for that, after which we will move on to the next item of business. I would invite those members who would wish to ask a question to press the request to speak button, and I call Ros McCall.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I thank the Minister for advance sight of the statement. And the Scottish Conservatives still believe that improving outcomes for disabled people in their transition into adulthood is absolutely the right thing to do, especially given the poor experiences of transitions that many disabled young people are continuing to have. But the fact that we're 1 year on since the Scottish Government reiterated its commitment to publish a transition to adulthood strategy by the end of this year, and we're no further forward, is disappointing to say the least. And despite warm words like commitment, reassure, currently developing, and soon, this further statement of intent, well, we're here today with a ministerial statement containing no concrete timeline for delivery. So can the Minister therefore guarantee that the strategy will be completed before the end of this parliamentary term? And secondly, will the statements list as an action by the Scottish Government that they're taking forward in the absence of a strategy? So will these actions actually start to make a tangible difference? When will that happen to the lives of young people as they transition? And given the reliance on the third sector to deliver these tangible differences, can the Minister confirm continued funding for these projects?
Minister.
I thank Ros McCall for that question. So, as I said in my statement, I appreciate that it will be disappointing that the strategy has been delayed, but it is for very good reason. We've always been clear that we would seek to develop a strategy that recognises both the urgency of the improvements we've heard are required, but also allowing sufficient time to support the engagement and participation of those it will affect. So where the online survey seeking feedback on the statement of intent received 151 responses, we conducted a further period of engagement between May to August 24, with engagement with over 500 people. And I'm now committed to ensuring that each and every one of those responses is given the consideration it deserves. With that in mind, and in collaboration with the external strategic working group set up to support the development of the strategy, we're allowing that additional time. I do aim to publish the strategy in spring 25, but I will absolutely do that sooner if I feel that is a possibility.
I call Pam Clancy.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer, and I thank the Minister for advance sight of her statement and for agreeing to our request to give it. However, I am really disappointed in where we are and what it says today. I introduced my bill in 2022 because I believed and still do that disabled children and young people need extra support at transition to give them a fighting chance in their future. My bill was rejected, and this government promised to introduce a national transitions to adulthood strategy. The Minister said at the time, and I quote, that the government are not resting on our laurels, that the strategy is now delayed, a year since my bill was rejected, and indeed 8 years since the government promised a strategy in their 2016 manifesto, makes it hard to see how the commitment isn't resting on their laurels, and to use engagement with a group of people who are consistently engaged and have been telling the government about this issue as a reason for that is really, really unfortunate. 2,202 young disabled people finished school in 2023. They could have had support had the government published the promised strategy. The fact that this government are delaying this strategy again is a betrayal, and they need to answer to the thousands of disabled children who've missed out. Because what's the point in a government if it takes them more than 8 years to commit to something they say they'll do in a manifesto? So can I ask the Minister, does she agree with Martin Luther King that a right delayed is a right denied?
Minister.
I'm sorry to hear of any instance where any child or young person doesn't get the support that they need. In relation to Ms Duncan Glancy's bill, it was quite clear that Parliament agreed last year that Ms Duncan Glancy's bill would not resolve the challenges facing disabled young people in the transition to adult life. Now, Ms Duncan Glancy speaks about progress, and as I've said, I am absolutely not. This government is not resting on its laurels in terms of making improvements for young disabled people. I've already laid out in my statement a number of actions that we are making progress. Work is progressing to develop work is continuing to progress to develop the strategy, and I, as I said, have committed to publishing that in spring 25. And as I've said, I will continue to engage with Ms Duncan Glancy on where she feels those improvements could be made. But I really want to emphasise that I hold as much urgency in relation to this as I believe the member does.
I call Karen Adams, to be followed by Rona Mackay.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It is vital that disabled young people have informed choice and control about the support provided to them. Can the Minister say a bit more about how the Scottish Government will ensure the rights and preferences of disabled children and young people are at the heart of decision-making processes on their individual transitions to young adult life?
Minister.
Absolutely, and I would assure Ms Adam that, as with almost everything in my role, I believe that children and young people should be absolutely at the heart of decision-making. Early transitions planning should be available to young disabled people, and it should adopt a holistic, person-centred approach to empower young people to dream big and identify and pursue their goals and aspirations. And this was a priority that was already set out in the Statement of Intent. And it's underpinned by the UNCRC, which, as Parliament knows, and as said in my statement, we've recently incorporated. In particular, Article 23 states parties recognise that a mentally or physically disabled child should enjoy a full and decent life in conditions which ensure dignity, promote self-reliance and facilitate the child's active participation in the community. Article 13, the child shall have the right to freedom of expression. This right shall include freedom to seek, receive and impart information and ideas of all kinds, regardless of frontiers. So I believe that in line with a lot of Scottish Government priorities and also legislation, that will absolutely be a key consideration and is a key consideration in development of the strategy.
I call Rona Mackay, to be followed by Daniel Johnson. Ms Mackay.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Following from my colleague's question, I welcome the Minister's comments about the need to bring disabled young people along on this journey with us. Following the Government's Statement of Intent on Transitions and the establishment of the working group, There has been extensive consultation with stakeholders, including disabled young people and their families. Can the Minister speak any more on that engagement and outline how, moving forward, this engagement will continue?
Minister.
Absolutely. So when we engaged more widely on the strategy between May to August 24, we took a solution-focused approach to understand what is currently working well and what could be even better in relation to each of the strategy's priorities as set out in the Statement of Intent. And during this period, as I've said, we engaged with over 500 people across Scotland, including parents and carers, professionals from a range of sectors, supporting young disabled people, and most crucially of all, young disabled people themselves. And I extend my sincerest thanks to everyone involved in that. Throughout the strategy's development, we've also worked directly with some groups of young disabled people, including ARC Scotland's Divergent Influencers, Children in Scotland's Inclusion Ambassadors, and ILF Scotland's Young Ambassadors. And the views of these groups continue to be sought via representation on that external strategic working group. Post-publication, I think the greatest measure of success of the strategy will be feedback directly from young disabled people themselves, and will continue to engage with young disabled people, their families and others who support them to ensure that the strategy is having its intended impact.
I call Daniel Johnson to be followed by Audrey Nicholl. Mr Johnson.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. The Scottish Government recently published its guidance on the use of seclusion and restraint. Transitions have just one mention in that guidance in paragraph 29, which is a single sentence. So I'd like to ask the Minister, does she think that that's an area for future revision of that guidance, or indeed other areas of policy and guidance? And would the Government be willing to discuss how transitions could be included in my bill? Because after all, does she agree with me that the best prevention of the use of seclusion and restraint is by having adequate support plans in place at every point of transition?
Minister.
I would certainly be happy to discuss that with the member. I know that the Cabinet Secretary is leading on this work, and we would be happy to discuss the issues raised by Mr Johnson. Absolutely.
I call Audrey Nicholl to be followed by Ross Greer. Ms Nicholl.
While a lot of disabled young people will transition to college or to the world of work, many of them are also going to university. So I wonder if the Minister can outline what support the Scottish Government is able to provide for disabled students in this particular space.
Minister.
Absolutely. The Scottish Government is committed to ensuring that all students with a disability, long-term medical condition or additional support needs are supported as they study in further and higher education. So as an initial step, we've opened up living cost support to disabled students who are studying full-time distance learning courses, who are unable to study campus-based courses because of their disability. Now, universities operate independently of the Scottish Government, but each college or university has a duty under the Equality Act to make reasonable adjustments to ensure that students with disabilities, including long-term medical conditions, are not placed at a disadvantage. Scottish universities are covered by the public sector equality duty, which requires them to, amongst other things, report on mainstreaming the equality duty, publish equality outcomes and report progress, and assess and review policies and practices. And the regulatory body for the Equality Act is the Equality and Human Rights Commission. More detail of its work in Scotland can be found on its website.
I call Ross Greer to be followed by Alex Cole-Hamilton. Mr Greer.
Thank you. A successful transition to adulthood is made far more likely if a disabled young person has had a successful experience in education. But if every single action in the government's ASL action plan were to be implemented to be delivered in full, it still would make next to no difference to the appalling situation faced by so many children and young people with additional needs in our schools. So can I ask the Minister if she agrees, as much as I welcome the commitment to work with other parties, that at a minimum the transition strategy must be far more ambitious and far more substantive than the additional support for learning strategy already is?
Minister.
And I think if that's something that's felt across the board, that will absolutely come back to us through our engagement. I've already told of the groups that we're engaging with, so we are engaging very fully. And I've said the reason that I'm standing here today because of the delay to the strategy is because I want to ensure that each of those responses is considered fully. If that is something that comes up, then I am absolutely happy to, as I say, give that the consideration it deserves to ensure that all young disabled people have the support that they require when they are making that transition to adulthood.
I call Alex Cole-Hamilton to be followed by Claire Adamson. Mr.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Presiding Officer, each week we all meet constituents in our surgeries who are being failed by the inability to properly access the support they need when they're transitioning to adulthood. And when we debated Pam Duncan-Glancy's bill last year, the Scottish Government persuaded the majority of MSPs in this chamber that support was otherwise accessible, that there was too much duplication and overlap to key aspects of existing legislation, but the strategy that has been promised to resolve that is still delayed. Is she persuaded that that duplication of which she spoke, or her government spoke, will be swept away and swept up in a strategy that is still to be forthcoming? And is she confident that that is achievable without further legislation?
Minister.
I am confident that it's achievable, and I would just maybe highlight to the member that although, of course, the government did oppose the bill, the committee scrutinised the bill and also agreed that it would not have the intended outcomes. So I think this was quite clear to members across this chamber. I've been quite clear. I've already highlighted when the statement will be coming out. I do believe that it is possible to make improvements without further legislative change. And as I highlighted in the statement, there are already a number of ways where we are looking to improve things. Also, and we have, as I said in the statement, new responsibilities under UNCRC, implementing GURFIC, implementing GURFI. So I believe that things are improving every day. Although, of course, I'm still sorry to hear of any instances from Mr Cole-Hamilton's constituents where they're not receiving the support that they need.
I call Claire Adamson to be followed by Jeremy Balfour. Ms Adamson.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. The Scottish Government has made substantial progress in reducing the disability employment gap, but we know that that very much depends on third sector and social enterprise support in that. Given the reaction to the national insurance increases for employers and the concerns that have been raised by the third sector, can the Minister outline how she is engaging with the third sector in developing the strategy going forward?
Minister.
I think I've already laid out how I'm engaging, or how we have already engaged with the third sector, and I would just be very clear that I engage with the third sector on a daily basis. I understand the concerns they're having around those national insurance contributions, and I understand, of course, the huge impact that third sector organisations have on the ground, and will continue discussions with them around how best we can support them.
I call Jeremy Balfour to be followed by Emma Harper. Mr Balfour.
Deputy Presiding Officer, there are a number of things that seem to be missing in the Minister's statement and answers today, not least any meaningful metrics by which we can judge the success of the government's actions. So can the Minister tell the Chamber how she plans to measure whether or not her policies are successful, and how will she collect the data so that this Parliament can scrutinise more carefully?
Minister.
So progress on the statement will be monitored and reviewed, and I think the best judge of whether the actions that we're taking are successful or not will be through scrutiny in the Parliament from opposition members, will be through scrutiny from children and young people. It is those voices that I want to hear, and they will continue to tell us where we're getting it right, where we're getting it wrong, and where we need to go further. But there will be the actions laid out in the strategy will be monitored to ensure that they are having the effect that we want them to have in terms of providing that support.
I call Emma Harper to be followed by Miles Briggs.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It is so important that children and young people receive all the support they need to flourish and thrive, including those children, young people with a disability or additional needs in rural areas like my South Scotland region. Could the Minister set out what the Scottish Government is doing in terms of additional support for learning for children and families in more remote and rural areas?
Minister.
Absolutely. Scotland's approach to supporting children and young people in their learning has inclusion at its heart. And that's why last week we published the third additional support for learning progress report. and this sets out progress made towards delivery of the actions set out in the ASL Action Plan between November 22 and June 24, and was developed in partnership with COSLA and ASL project board members. And to complement the progress report, an updated ASL Action Plan was also published outlining the steps we're taking to meet the recommendations set out in that review. A range of actions have been carried out to date. We've established the Success Looks Different Awards to co-create and collaborate with children, young people and their families. Work has begun to establish parent groups within local authorities. Professional learning opportunities for our teaching and support staff continues to be a priority. And I would just highlight the responsibility for the delivery of education has evolved at a range of levels, in fact, in education authorities, schools and the actions of individual members of staff, including in rural locations. Partner organisations, including health boards, social work services, further and higher education in the third sector, all also have a role in delivering additional support for learning as part of delivering educational outcomes for children and young people.
Thank you. And I call Miles Briggs to be followed by Martin Whitfield.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Apologies again for arriving late in the chamber. And I'd asked the Minister if she would be honest to the chamber that a year on, we don't seem to have seen any progress whatsoever. All the progress she's outlined in the statement has been made by the third sector, and we welcome that, but we haven't seen progress from the government 8 years on from when they said that we would. So can I ask the Minister a simple question? What will she actually measure progress over the next year? Will it be in terms of results of people going into more positive destinations, or will there be no measurement of what the government intends to take forward over the next 12 months?
Minister.
Can I just, in relation to the members' comments around what has happened in the last year, I have set out a range of areas where I feel we are seeing progress, and I am absolutely happy to commit to providing a full progress update on the actions that I set out last year if Parliament would find that helpful. In terms of progress that we are making, we are focusing on the getting it right for every child approach. We are focusing on strengthening implementation by working in partnership with a range of services and stakeholders to ensure that this is embedded across all sectors. In relation to adult services, work is also ongoing in developing GURFE, which, as I've said, builds on existing adult practice and best learning from GURFE. And in relation to, although I've already said the progress will be analysed, and I'm happy to provide progress reports when that is required, the best tell of whether that we are getting this right is the children and young people who are experiencing those services and what we are hearing from them. If we are hearing that we are not going far enough or fast enough, then that's absolutely something that the government will have to consider.
And I call Martin Whitfield.
I'm very grateful, Deputy Presiding Officer. Ros McCall asked about funding. The Children and Young Persons Early Intervention Fund, which is the vehicle through which the third sector are funded, is due to end in March 2025. Can the Minister confirm this will continue beyond that date?
Minister.
I am not able to confirm that at this point because as the member will know, the budget will take place on the 4th of December, and I'm not able to confirm that prior to that. However, what I will say to the member and will assure the member is that, as I've said, I engage with third sector organisations on practically a daily basis, and I hear how important this funding is to them, including my visit this morning. So I would just highlight that I absolutely understand and I hear the calls from the third sector around the uncertainty of this funding.
Thank you, Minister. That concludes the statement. There will be a short pause before we move on to the next item of business to allow frontbench teams to change position should they so wish. Thank you.
So, what's going to happen, huh? How much money are they going to give towards this? How many more people are going to get failed?